Good morning. It is Monday, the 16th of November, and today our readings were First Chronicles chapter 7 and 8 and Hebrews 11. Today I'll be focusing on the reading from the book of Hebrews, specifically verses 1 and 2. Before I narrow in on that, I just want to put these verses into the context of the whole book. Hebrews is unique in the New Testament for a couple of reasons. One being that we're not sure who wrote it, and the other being that it's not a letter that was written to a church to correct some issues, to tell them that they were doing this other thing well. It's not written like anything Paul wrote. It is a sermon to a church that is struggling. It is a sermon to a church that is being pressed in on from all sides by political pressure and by the world in general. It is a church whose members are having their property confiscated and finding themselves in prison for confessing Christ as their saviour, and possibly even being put to death for that belief. It's a sermon written to the people of God who are on the verge of giving up, who are desperate, and most importantly, who are worn out and tired. It was a common belief in the church after Christ's death and resurrection that the return of Christ was imminent, that he would come back in a matter of months, but months turned to years, and years turned to decades. And by the time this was written, the people were tired of waiting for something that they were no longer sure was coming. A lot of commentators note here that Hebrews has a structure that we're familiar with, a sermon with 3 points. And as the author begins his final point here in verse 11, he's ready to drive the sermon home into the hearts of those who are tired and worn down and fed up of waiting, to speak about a faith that will carry us to the end. That brings us to chapter 11, verses 1 and 2, the author's definition of what faith is. Now, faith is the realization of that which is hoped for, the inner conviction of things that are not seen. Faith is something that is discussed very regularly amongst Christians, but it is important to know exactly how the Bible defines faith for us. We don't get to decide what faith means to us individually. Back when it was written, it was normal to give definitions in the formula of now blank is. So that's exactly what the author is intending to do here. In one simple sentence, he gives the people of the church a definition of what faith is, which I would really like to focus closely on today. The reason that it's most striking is that faith is not characterized in Hebrews as a belief. It's so much more than that. The author describes it as the realization for what we hope for. People throughout history have challenged Christianity in saying that there's no proof for what we believe, that our faith makes no sense and we can't prove it. And if the author to the Hebrews had been challenged with that, he would have laughed, because in his definition, faith doesn't need proof. Faith itself is the proof of that which we cannot see. And he can say this because faith is not a belief that we hold. It's something in the life that we live. It is the driving force behind our actions and the thing that motivates us to live. From here on in the chapter, the author talks about faith not as the subject of the stories that he references, but he talks about faith as the instrument being used in all of them. By faith is how every account starts, essentially to say that faith is what drove all these people to do what they did, and they acted with a view towards something invisible, something beyond them that they couldn't grasp. They were totally sure of what they believed in by faith. A belief doesn't change a person, but the Christian faith does. The people in the church were promised an eternal inheritance through Christ. They'd been promised something amazing, but they didn't have it yet. What they had then was suffering and pain. but also they had the promise of greater things and a life filled with blessing to come to them. And they were being given the opportunity to join all those who had gone before them by faith, using the example of all of their ancestors who've come before them to encourage them, that each of them acted on the basis of something that they didn't have in front of them, but knew was in the future waiting for them. So I ask today, are you tired? Are you frustrated? And do we sometimes feel like giving up on hope? We're certainly not the first people in history to ever feel that way, but I urge every single person to take encouragement from Hebrews and to fix our eyes on hope in the future, on the day that Christ returns to set all things right. If the people of the New Testament were expecting it to happen tomorrow and it never did, we have the opposite problem now. And sometimes we find ourselves thinking like it's never going to happen. Maybe our idea of it's fuzzy because we don't see it as a real event that's coming in the future. But God has promised that one day soon Christ will return to raise the dead to everlasting life, to judge the living and the dead, and to bring those who live by faith into his everlasting kingdom to live with him. We can't see that kingdom today. We can't even conceive of it properly, but we know that it's real because we have faith. A faith that is one that should cause us to act boldly as we serve a goal that is so far beyond the understanding of the world. And the world will mock and deride that faith, and it will even make life as difficult as possible for people who have faith, for the people who live by faith. But the author to the Hebrews says that we shouldn't worry and we shouldn't care because we can be certain that there is something greater in store for us just a little ways down the road. If we lose sight of our destination, how can we walk towards it? Fix your eyes on the future and be encouraged, because what we're waiting for by faith is worth waiting for.